But the first person we've got, and I'm so pleased he's agreed to attend today, is Toby Perkins. Now, Toby is an MP, but he's not just an MP. He's chair of a select committee, the Environmental Accounts Committee, which is very much concerned with this particular area. So thank you, Toby, for joining us. It's really great that you're here. And I think lots of people are really anxious to hear you and pleased to hear you as well. So can we start then with you, Tony, straight away and go into the questions? I'm going to interview Tony for about 10 to 15 minutes and open it up for 20 minutes for people here to ask questions. Then the other two speakers will be interviewed for 10 minutes each. And then we'll open up it again for 20 minutes for all of you to ask questions and make comments. So let's start, Toby. And again, thanks for joining us. First, it would be great for you just to tell us what the Parliamentary Environment Accounts Select Committee is and why you have your concern about heat excess and what we call wild weather.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation, the opportunity to address you. The name of the committee is actually Environmental Audit Select Committee, not Environmental Accounts. But the Environmental Audit Select Committee has been operating in Parliament since around 1998, and there are many select committees that study individual departments. So every department, from education to transport to health and DESNES, has their own select committee shadowing effectively the work of that select committee. There are then two particular cross-party committees. One of them is the Public Accounts Committee, which effectively looks at the money and value for money of each department. And then the second, which our role is to really look at the environmental performance of every single government department, to look at cross-party issues and cross-departmental issues when it comes to the environment. To give an example of the kinds of things that we've looked at in this Parliament, we've looked at the issue of house building and the impact on the environment, the government's ambitious targets on house building. We've looked at air quality. We've looked at the issue of the global marine environment and what we're doing alongside other nations across the world to preserve the marine environment. We are currently involved in a study into data centres. So as you can hear, we look at a really wide variety of different things. Now, the predecessor committee in 2023, under the chairmanship of a Conservative member of Parliament called Philip Dunn, actually conducted a short inquiry. And after the May heatwave this year, my committee conducted a one-off follow-up session on extreme heat, and we heard from a number of experts about the risks to human health, to the environment, to infrastructure posed by heat episodes, and how they're likely to increase in length and severity over coming years. And despite this, we also heard that the UK is currently ill-equipped to manage the impacts from extreme heat. And following our session and during the heat wave in June, we wrote to the Secretary of State to highlight the evidence that the EAC had received and to ask her about some of the government's plans to address risks from overheating, including in workplaces, schools, hospitals, new buildings, and its wider climate adaptation plans.
Can I say, I mean, just to interrupt you, you mentioned it in what you just said, but you've said that the government is currently falling far short from what is needed. You've said it's a crisis. You've said that you're concerned about it, but you've also said that the government is falling far short, and successive governments as well. What do you mean by that?
referring to was actually the Climate Change Committee themselves, who said that the actually previous government's National Adaptation Plan fell far short of what was required. We had National Adaptation Plan 3 in 2023. We have the next one, next iteration scheduled in 2028. And really, what the government said was that in a whole variety of areas, we are ill-equipped to protect. We have a country that's built for a climate that no longer exists. In the 2024 heat waves, it was estimated 3,000 excess deaths during that heat wave, and the predictions are that by the end of this Parliament, 10,000 extra people will be dying as a result of the level of extreme heat that we have. Now that can affect anyone, but particularly it tends to impact on the elderly. It impacts on people with respiratory or heart conditions. It impacts on diabetics and asthmatics. And people like that are particularly vulnerable to excess temperatures. We've had many pieces of evidence about illnesses being made iller by how hot the hospital was that they were in during this recent heat wave, and indeed many people who else because they just can't cope with the heat in our hospitals, and there's other impacts that we found out about as well.
I mean, you've explained how serious it is, but the Climate Change Committee, which you mentioned, has said, we're way behind many other countries in adaptation. And the national briefing people who have been running briefings, per people's emergency briefings across the country, many people on that said it is so serious. It's like a wartime situation. It's a wartime crisis. Do you see it as serious as that?
Well, it is extremely serious. I think it's important to say that actually, Britain is one of the better performing countries when it comes to our to our performance on climate change. I think more in terms of emissions reductions than in terms of nature and adaptation. But no nation is doing enough, and in fact, we have a political consensus that's existed over the last 20 years that's now fractured, and increasingly parties on the right saying, well, we think the government's doing too much on climate change. I agree with what the emergency briefing said, that actually, we need to do more, and we need to be pushing for other countries in the world to do more. But the issue of adaptation is a separate one, and it's a very important one. And the first and most important thing to say is that adaptation is not an alternative to taking action on climate change. We need to do both. And you don't adapt once, you will continue to adapt every 5-10 years, because if we continue to see, as we expect, the temperature increasing. So the adaptation for a climate that's 2 degrees hotter than it was in 1992 will be certain steps. You need to do more if it goes up another degree after that, and another degree after that. Each of these will have different impacts. And so we do need to do more in terms of adaptation, but we also need to keep our foot absolutely on the ground in terms of reducing emissions and looking towards net zero.
You say we should do more, and clearly we should do more, but what is it that the government hasn't done that you think that they should do?
I'm sorry, you cut out for a second there, Francis. Just say that again.
I was saying, what has the government not done that you think they should do?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the adaptation plan, I mean, there's particular buildings that we know the risk is greatest. So let's start with those. Yeah, I mean, the first is our hospitals. People go into our hospitals and care homes because they are generally frail already. They're already in poor health, and so it is particularly important at a reasonable temperature. So, air conditioning is a part of this. Thinking about, just the operation, even ahead of air conditioning, just the operation, making sure that nursing teams are set up to ensure that patients who are inconvenienced by not being regularly given water and during normal times are positively endangered by being left dehydrated. So from things as simple as making sure that there's cold and regular water, to reducing the temperatures, to ensuring there's cold flannels and so on to keep patients cool. And also where you've got patients who aren't going to, because of dementia or other conditions, aren't going to be able to keep themselves cool, that hospitals are adapted to doing that. So some of it is long-term adaptation, things like air conditioning and thinking about buildings that we construct. Some of it is immediate mechanisms in terms of the way that our hospitals work to keep people cool. Alongside that, we could say very similar about care homes. We could say in terms of schools, children are very vulnerable to excess temperatures, but also it has a huge impact on their performance. We discovered in the committee that a student doing their exams in a temperature over 25 degrees is 20% more likely to fail than if they did it in an ambient temperature. So, we will have students this year taking their GCSEs, their crucial A levels, and doing worse than they would be if it was cooler.
And so let me ask you, you've laid out what the problem is, but what is stopping government taking the action that you think they should take? What's the impediment? What's the barrier for
I
them
guess,
taking action?
Candidly, cost and resources. I think there will also, I think psychologically, we still as a country have not got to a place where we understand Britain as a hot country. It runs so contrary to everything that we think of in terms of ourselves. We always mock ourselves in terms of rain and in terms of our summers, lasting for very short periods of time. And I think we haven't got we haven't got used to the idea that Britain's a country in which you can be sat in 38 degrees. And we all, lots of us reflect back on the 1976 summer, and it was a long, hot summer, and it was a freak one-off condition. The last 5 summers that we've had have been the hottest 5 years in total on history, and they are the coldest 5 years we will ever have again. So we need to psychologically understand that we're now a hot country in the summer. We need to recognise cost implications, but there's also going to be resource implications, just as there were with COVID and other health emergencies. And some of this is about just differing the way that we operate, but some of this is going to be, strategic investment.
How do we actually influence MPs to actually understand the problem that we are a hot country now? We're going to have all these things, because we often talk to MPs and they very often will be sympathetic, agree with us, but they go into the House of Commons and vote the opposite way because they're whipped to do it. So community accountability is difficult. There's a dysfunction in our democracy in that way. So how can we influence MPs so they will vote the right way?
I think ultimately it comes down to making it a priority for government. I hope that the work that our select committee does, which government will respond to, they're duty bound to respond to our reports, will push excess heat up the political agenda. I think the summer that we've just had, once again, is making this more of an issue. In various parts of Britain, we've seen wildfires. We will get the excess deaths. But we're used to an NHS winter crisis. We're going to have to start getting used to an NHS summer extreme heat crisis too. So it is going to be about putting pressure on government to prioritise this at a time when there's all sorts of other things that also need prioritising, and that includes, of course, defence. But it is very important.
And what do you think we can do in civil society to help make the government treat this problem as serious as it should? What can we do?
I mean, I think it's important that we should be contacting our members of parliament after this event and speaking to them about the evidence that our committee heard, the letter that we sent, and also what people are experiencing. I mean, one of the sort of simple strategic things that we possibly need to be considering more now is shutters in our houses, and even just shutting the curtains, because we're used to growing up looking out outside the window and seeing it sunny and saying, "Oh, that's a lovely day. How good! Open the curtains. Let's get some warmth in." But actually, keeping having shutters as we would routinely expect if we went to France, Italy, or Spain, keeping the curtains shut in hot weather will help us to reduce those temperatures. I think in terms of also pressurising local members of parliament to say what the government is doing on excess heat, particularly within environments like hospitals, schools, and care homes, would be valuable. But also thinking about construction too. We routinely you'd never buy a house these days. It was a modern house that had no central heating, but you would quite often buy a house that didn't have any cooling mechanisms, and actually heat pumps are also available to be cooling properties, and speeding up the transition to heat pumps is also valuable.